afternoon. Thank you for having me with you on this very special and important day in Rwanda's history. It's a day, of course, to remember, to reflect, but I think it's also a day to honor the progress that's occurring in Rwanda, to honor all of you who are rebuilding this country that I believe now is a model on the continent, and to honor the resiliency of the human spirit. There are really threads that I hear and see through the different talks. What Tim Gallimore has just talked about in terms of genocide denial, unfortunately there's also denial of progress. And I'll talk just briefly about that. There's much to celebrate in modern day Rwanda. And I'm going to talk about the first three. Gacaca, dealing with the perpetrators using a Rwandan cultural process, focusing on gender. Rwanda now is the one country in the world with more women in parliament than any country in the world, an incredibly significant development. And good governance. Most of the criticism of Rwanda revolves around the issue of governance, as Tim Gallimore knows. And I believe what's happening in Rwanda is a new model of development that all of us need to pay attention to. So I'll talk briefly about those three. But Rwanda is building a knowledge-based economy using ICT, information communications technology. Most of the country, as you may know, is now wired with fiber optic. In education, I've spent a lot of time looking at curriculums, traveling around the country, talking to teachers, very innovative, tolerance-based curriculum. And in health, some incredible developments that we can all learn about, but I'll focus on the first three. So what's the context? As everyone in this room knows, over 1 million dead, infrastructure decimated, social cohesion destroyed. What do you do with the perpetrators? Unlike Germany, the perpetrators were in the country. In the first 5 years after the genocide, about 6,000 cases were tried, but at that speed it would have taken over 100 years to try only 120,000 detainees, while there were many other suspects that were identified later and those who were in exile. The conclusion was to look for an alternative, and there were those in the country who said, let's go back to a cultural process called Gacaca. The origins and the purpose of Gacaca started during the consultative meetings organized by the Office of the President from May 1998 to 99. And as I said, the Gacaca courts originate from Rwandan culture. The goals were to reveal the truth, to speed up the genocide trials, to eradicate the culture of impunity, to reconcile and strengthen unity, and to demonstrate the Rwandan society's capacity to solve its own problems. As most of you in this audience know, the criminal suspects were classified into 3 categories. Category 1 were the planners and the instigators. Category 2 comprised the persons accused of killings or injuring with or without an intent to kill. And Category 3, the persons who committed crimes against property only. Gacaca dealt with Categories 2 and 3. There were many challenges during the implementation of Gacaca, as Tim Gallimore has just talked about, the persistence of genocide ideology, threats, harassment, and killing of some of the survivors, witnesses, and judges. The judges, as you may know, were drawn and voted on by the community to be judges of their peers. People fled to other countries, concealment of the truth, cases of bribery, and managing, obviously, an incredibly large number of cases. Where are we now in 2012? In May of this year, Gacaca will end. And the Gacaca process has tried almost 2 million cases, an incredible number of cases covered in a very short period of time. The Gacaca Documentation Center that I've just come back from Rwanda and begun to review is a treasure trove of information, very important historical information for scholars. It contains written information, image and sound, samples of equipment, and one of the results is telling the truth has led to information about where dead bodies have been buried. So a very significant judicial process that, as Tim Gallimore has talked about, is not well understood or even respected by many in the West. I was outside the Minister of Justice's office at the beginning of the Gacaca process when a very senior person from Amnesty International walked in and said to the Minister of Justice, how could you possibly think about holding trials for people for murder without a lawyer present? And I remember very carefully what the Minister of Justice said. He said, who's going to give us those defense lawyers? We have to figure out a way to do it ourselves. So I think this is a very important process that Rwanda is just ending, the Gacaca process, that has certainly examined more cases than the ICTR that Tim Gallimore has talked about. And I believe it's one of the greatest experiments in reconciliation the world has seen and worthy of much more investigation. It hasn't ended and it won't end it with Gacaca. As I said, as an educator, I believe that the textbooks we use are very powerful in obviously educating the next generation. So here's a primary 6 social studies example. Write down the terms genocide and massacre. Explain what they mean. What reasons do you think one group might have for wanting to injure or destroy another group in this area? Find out about the work of your Gacaca course. So a very reasonable and reasoned way to begin to discuss within primary schools the whole purpose and reasoning behind Gacaca. So the second piece I want to look at where I believe there's an incredible progress in Rwanda is the issue of gender. And quoting President Kagame a number of years ago, today women constitute half of our population. It's an affront that decisions that affect their lives continue to be made without their participation. I wonder how many presidents around the world make statements like that. And certainly in the United States, we're in a big debate right now about the role of women. President Kagame has taken a very powerful and important role in this area of gender equity. Go ahead. As you may or may not know, the Constitution, like Uganda's Constitution and several other countries, has mandated within it. In Rwanda, 30% of the seats are mandated for all decision-making levels. Right now, 56% of parliamentarians are women, many governors, mayors, vice mayors, and women also at the lowest level of representation, which is the cell level. Just quickly, why is gender equity important? It's probably the most important intervention that one can make in development. When girls and women are educated, for example, it is the single most important intervention in reducing fertility, infant and child mortality, and HIV prevalence. And some very interesting recent work is pointing to gender equity being a very significant positive variable in improving economic growth and reducing corruption. So Rwanda is on a very important path with their focus on gender equity. Again, to look at the school books, here's a 4th grade reader, Gender in Our Province. The traditional place of men and women, men were the most important people in the household, they owned the land and cattle, they were responsible for the income, and so on. Women did all the hard work, they planted and harvested food crops, did the cooking and childcare, and so on. So here's the traditional place of men and women. And the second page is position of men and women in our province today. Women run businesses and are able to borrow money. Men are no longer assumed to be the head of the household. Women are now on committees at each level of government, and so on. So once again, a very reasonable presentation of the role of gender for 4th and 5th graders in Rwanda. In addition to the progress in gender equity in education and health, access to education and healthcare is improved at all levels. You can see the primary school completion rates. The most recent data available for 2010 and 11 reached 79% for boys and 82% for girls, compared to their targets, which were much lower, 59 and 58%. And on the health side, one of the big developments, positive developments, the percentage of assisted births in an accredited health facility has increased in the last 5 years from 28% to almost 70%. Again, exceeding Rwanda's own internal targets. Some more of the progress in Rwanda, if you look at poverty reduction, in 2006, GDP was growing at about 6.5%, with a target of 8.1, and an actual last year of 8.2%. Share of the population in extreme poverty, 5 years ago, 37% of the population reduced down to 24%. Access to safe water increasing from 64% to 74%. So in almost all areas of what we would call social development, gender, education, and health, tremendous progress. A little bit more here, the infant mortality rate has dropped, declined by almost 20%, the under 5 mortality rate by 22%, and the maternal mortality rate by about 30%. I live, unfortunately, right now in northern Nigeria, the area of the world with the highest maternal mortality in the world. So it's very important for me, and I think for others in Nigeria, to acknowledge what's happened and to see how they've done it in Rwanda. Go ahead. And here's how they've done it. And I think this is the important message I would like taken from my brief presentation. It's governance, it's leadership, it's vision, and it's accountability. And that's not what you hear in the popular press. It's not what you hear from Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, but I think it's the most powerful, important story emerging from Rwanda. So many of you know, right after the genocide, Vision 2020 was written. It's really a blueprint for where Rwanda wants to be by the year 2020. And in the preface, you can read this: our country's been badly governed, the colonial and post-colonial regimes ruled on the basis of favoritism, Rwanda's poor, and until recently, we were strongly divided. What a bold vision 10 years ago. Vision 2020 expresses the aim of attaining the per capita income of a middle-income country in an equitable way, and the aspiration to become a modern, strong, and unified nation. Again, when this was written and released, people laughed. They said it's impossible. Rwanda couldn't possibly aspire to such big goals. The core of the development process is what constitutes Rwanda's principal assets, its people, and the vision of using science and technology and ICT to help realize this vision. How did they do it? I wish you could see this better. But it began with something called ubudeyi, or self-governance, where after the genocide and people began talking to each other, the focus was on, first of all, what are our assets? Before we talk about what we need, what are our assets? And in this social map, you can't really see it, but there's a road, there's a river, and there are cows. So throughout the country, social mapping was done at local levels to determine what do we have in our communities before we focus on what it is we need. Ubudeyi, again, was a cultural process like the Cha-Cha, but it now refers to a participatory process of budgeting and planning at the village level, where citizens, even the poorest of the poor, allocate funds according to the village's priority. Combine ubudeyi, which is what do we need, what are our assets, and what's most important to attain at the village level, with something called imihigo, which once again is a cultural process that used to be a traditional ritual and now really is a performance contract at all levels of society. It's used to set and evaluate progress in education, health, governance, agriculture, and so on. Imihigo began with the district governors and now is really spreading out to all levels of elected positions. Candidates for district mayors, for example, engage their communities to understand what the needs are, the ubudeyi, and how they relate to Rwanda's own Vision 2020 and the Millennium Development Goals. Each imihigo is unique, but the categories are not unique: social protection, governance, health, education, and so on. Here's an example of an imihigo signed by a mayor in 2006 when the process first began, and it was a commitment, a signed contract, a commitment of the mayor to his own citizens. Go ahead. And this is what it says in English: I, in the name of the population that I represent, pledge that I will achieve these objectives. Go ahead. This is what it looks like in Kinyarwanda. Go ahead. And these are the most recent district-level imihigo guidelines in education, in health, for example, creating nursery schools with indicators to determine whether or not the imihigo is being reached. Go ahead. Well, it wouldn't matter at all, this imihigo, this notion of performance-based governance, if money didn't match what was going on here. 30% of the budget has been decentralized. Each imihigo is reviewed at 3, 6, and 12 months, and I've sat through in Parliament and outside the Prime Minister's office when these presentations go on, and the mayors literally get red, green, or yellow. Red, you're off track. Yellow, you better work a little harder. Green, you're on track. After 5 years, 50% of the mayors have been removed by their constituents and the president for non-performance. This truly is accountable governance, is democracy with accountability. So I believe it's an accountability mechanism, a way to engage the poor, a method for determining local problems. Resources are being pushed down to match this. It's once again a Rwandese response to solving local problems, and it may lead to a new model for a development state. So I believe after many, many years of working and researching in Rwanda, that 18 years after what happened in 1994, Rwanda is making remarkable progress in education and health and gender and economy and justice and governance and local participation in health and ICT. Of course, many challenges remain in agriculture. It's still a very fast-growing country, in poverty and in income distribution. But I believe Rwanda, your country, is a country with great vision, with honest and capable leaders, focused on the future, developing new models of development, dealing with its history like we are today, and empowering hope.